I used to think nightmares ended when you woke up until the night I watched Jack trembling, dragged through the forest by a man with a gleaming knife pressed to his throat, his own mother whispering, "If you talk, no one can save you." Flashlights slicing the darkness, dogs barking, blood spattering leaves. In that moment, I realized the truth is crueler than any fiction. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to catch every gripping episode we bring next. Emma Parker's first morning in Maplewood was not the bright new beginning she'd promised herself during the drive up from Seattle. The house, a narrow blue craftsman with faded shutters and a wraparound porch, should have been a symbol of hope. Instead, it felt like the last outpost at the edge of the world, one misplaced box away from total collapse. Her suitcases were stacked by the door unopened. The air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and unfamiliar floors. She stood in the middle of her new living room, arms crossed over her chest as if she could hold herself together by sheer force of will. On the mantel, a single photograph had made the journey. Emma and Mike smiling at their wedding years ago, before things broke in ways neither of them could articulate. She turned the frame face down, almost flinching at the dull click of glass against wood. Outside, morning sunlight slid through the trees and across the patchwork lawns of a neighborhood that looked at first glance like every other North American suburb, orderly, anonymous, safe. But nothing felt safe anymore. Not after the slow unraveling of a marriage, not after the silences that grew louder than any argument ever could. She moved through the house in a fugue opening windows that refused to budge, testing light switches, checking the locks twice. The kitchen echoed with emptiness. She tried to imagine laughter here, the clatter of plates, a future in which this place would become a home. But hope was in short supply this morning. Every room seemed to carry the echo of someone else's life, leaving Emma suspended between what was and whatever might come next. By midday, the neighborhood began to reveal itself through small, tentative gestures. An elderly woman with a shock of white hair waved from across the street, introducing herself as Mrs. Fletcher. A golden retriever bounded down the sidewalk leash, dragging behind, pausing long enough for Emma to scratch behind his ears before he took off again. The mailman, a bearded man in his 50s, offered a polite nod as he slipped envelopes into her battered mailbox. The world spun on, oblivious to the ache coiling behind Emma's ribs. It wasn't until the afternoon that she met Dr. Alan Miller. He appeared on her porch with a casserole dish in hand, a practiced smile on his lips. He was the image of neighborly warmth, pressed chinos, cardigan, salt and pepper hair, combed to one side. "Welcome to Maplewood," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring, the kind you trusted on instinct. "I hope you like chicken divan? My wife swore it could cure anything." His wife, Emma, noted, was not present. Her absence lingered like a shadow in Miller's easy conversation. Emma accepted the casserole with more gratitude than she intended to show. She let herself be drawn into a brief, polite exchange, where she was from, where she taught before, what brought her to Vancouver. She offered the abbreviated version, the one that skimmed the surface of her pain. Needed a change. New start. Dr. Miller nodded as if he understood too much, a flicker in his eyes, suggesting the stories that lay beneath every front door in this neighborhood. When he left, Emma stood on the porch for a long moment, casserole warm in her hands, watching as Miller disappeared down the walk. A breeze picked up, whispering through the leaves, carrying the sound of distant laughter and a child's bicycle bell. The world, it seemed, was moving on. That night, the house felt too large for one person. Emma wandered from room to room, hands trailing along blank walls, searching for an anchor. The guest bedroom, stacked with boxes labeled, "Mike, don't open," pulsed with an unspoken dare. The den, empty, except for an upright piano with a single yellowed key, felt haunted by music she couldn't remember how to play. In her bedroom, the window looked out onto a street bathed in amber from the lone street lamp. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, beating a relentless rhythm against the glass. Sleep didn't come easily. The ceiling fan clicked and hummed overhead, spinning shadows into the corners. Emma lay awake, the sound of rain washing through her thoughts, a dull ache blooming behind her eyes. She pressed her palms to her chest, willing her heart to slow. The silence pressed in. She tried to remember the last time she'd felt at home anywhere. Sometime after midnight, she found herself in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator door covered in magnets left behind by the previous owners, Niagara Falls, Jasper Park, a plastic maple leaf. She traced their outlines, wondering about the lives that had filled this house before her. Had they been happy here? Had they felt lost too at the beginning? The only company was the storm. Thunder rolled in from the west, vibrating through the floorboards as if the world itself was reminding her of its power to shake foundations. Emma poured herself a glass of water, hands trembling just enough to spill a few drops onto the counter. She sipped, hoping to find steadiness, but the glass felt foreign in her grip like everything else. She made her way back to the living room, wrapping herself in a faded quilt and sinking into the couch. Her phone face down on the coffee table buzzed once, an automated message from her ex-husband. No words, just a reminder about the mortgage. Emma turned it off. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows, setting the front porch swing into motion. It creaked, a lonely, hollow sound in the darkness. Emma's thoughts spiraled, tumbling over regrets and what-ifs. She wondered if anyone else in this perfect little neighborhood lay awake at night, nursing wounds that couldn't be seen. Did they too press their hands to old scars, hoping for peace? Or was she the only ghost haunting these well-lit streets? She remembered the look in Dr. Miller's eyes, the precise way he'd folded his cardigan over his arm, the almost imperceptible pause before he'd said goodbye. There was kindness there, but something else as well. A weight, perhaps, or the residue of secrets kept too long. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that everyone she met here had a history they carried just out of sight, tucked behind polite smiles and perfect lawns. The rain fell harder. Emma's breathing slowed to match its rhythm. She felt the exhaustion settle into her bones, heavy and relentless. She wanted to believe that she could rebuild herself here, that these quiet streets could stitch her back together. But hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the memory of goodbyes and doors closed for the last time. As the clock crept toward 3 a.m., Emma surrendered. She let her mind drift, carried by the sound of rain on glass and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. She imagined herself dissolving into the storm, swept clean of grief and longing remade by the relentless downpour. In that moment, with thunder cracking overhead and the world held in suspension, she felt a flicker of possibility, small but real. The next morning would come. She would meet more neighbors, unpack the boxes, try to find her place among the living. For now, all she could do was breathe and let the rain sing her to sleep, one slow, aching heartbeat at a time. The storm rolled in just after midnight, sudden, an absolute, a tidal wave of black clouds and wind that rattled every window in Emma's little blue house. She'd been sitting on the edge of her bed, watching the rain splatter and stream down the glass, too restless for sleep and too tired to try. Outside, the trees bent under the weight of the wind, their shadows leaping across the lawns like ghosts caught in headlights. At first, she thought the crash was just a branch. But then, another noise, sharp, frantic, not the language of trees. Emma's skin prickled. She stepped quietly across the floor, careful not to disturb the silence she'd built around herself. She pushed aside the curtain and peered out into the night. The street was a blur of wet silver gray. The only light was the jaundiced glow of the street lamp, slicing the darkness into uneven halves. Through the downpour, she spotted movement, a shape darting from the house across the street, limbs wild and desperate. For a split second, she caught the outline of a boy no more than 12, skinny in a way that spoke of skipped meals, not childhood metabolism. He was barefoot, wearing only a thin, oversized t-shirt, the hem plastered to his thighs by the rain. She recognized him, the Evans kid. She'd seen him once or twice, trailing a few steps behind his mother, head down. He was running, not running, escaping. He reached the low hedge at the edge of the Evans yard, paused and hurled himself over, barely clearing the slick branches. In the split second before he landed, the window above him flared with yellow light. A woman's voice, a curse, lashed out into the night. Emma watched, heart hammering, as the boy scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward her porch. She didn't have time to think. Her instincts propelled her forward, unlocking the door before her mind caught up. The boy skidded to a stop, his breath ragged, his small body shaking from cold and adrenaline. Rainwater streamed down his face, tracing the sharp line of his cheekbones. He looked up at her hazel eyes, wet and wild. Not a trace of the shy neighbor kid now. "Please," he gasped, barely more than a whisper. "Don't tell them I'm here. Don't let them find me. His words broke his gaze, darting back over his shoulder, as if he expected the darkness itself to reach out and drag him back. Emma didn't hesitate. She stepped aside, holding the door open. He darted inside, hunched and dripping like a stray animal expecting to be kicked. She shut the door softly, then locked it, double-checking the deadbolt. The thunder cracked overhead so close it seemed to shudder the floorboards beneath her feet. She could see the boy shivering, his lips pressed tightly together, as he hugged himself, making himself as small as possible. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice quiet but urgent. He shook his head, the gesture almost defiant, but Emma caught the way his hands trembled, the dark splotches on his forearms, mud or bruises, she couldn't tell. For a moment they just stood there, the silence between them thick with fear. Outside, the wind howled. Then from across the street came the first shout. "Jack, where are you?" A man's voice, raw and angry, slicing through the storm. The boy Jack flinched, his eyes wide with terror. He pressed himself tighter against the wall, shrinking into the shadows of the entryway. Emma moved quickly. "This way," she whispered, leading him down the hall and into the small laundry room off the kitchen. She flicked on the dim overhead light and handed him a towel from the dryer. Jack wrapped himself up, burying his face for a second, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Footsteps pounded on the street outside, heavy and purposeful. Another voice, this one female, shrill and furious. "You better get back here. Now do you hear me?" The rage in the words was as sharp as broken glass. Emma crouched beside Jack. She didn't touch him. She recognized the kind of flinch that comes from too many hands, grabbing and pushing and shaking. "You're safe," she said, unsure if it was true, but needing him to believe it. "You can stay as long as you need to. No one's coming in here." Jack nodded, his face hidden in the folds of terry cloth. The night pressed close around the house, thick with rain and distant thunder. Emma's thoughts spun. Should she call the police? Should she wake the neighbors? But then Jack looked up, and the naked terror in his eyes made her decision for her. This was not a simple runaway or a midnight dare gone wrong. This was a child escaping something unspeakable. Outside, the storm seemed to gather, pulling itself tighter. There was the thump of someone banging on the Evans front door, then the slam as it was thrown open. Emma heard the muffled shouts, the stomp of boots on wet pavement. For one heart-stopping moment, someone paused in front of her own house. The porch light flickered, catching a blurred face behind a curtain of rain. Emma held her breath, counting heartbeats, praying the darkness would hold. She heard the scrape of footsteps, too slow, too deliberate, moving along the path, checking every window, every sliver of light. Jack tensed, curling up smaller on the laundry room floor. Emma closed the door quietly, keeping only a crack open so she could listen. The minutes stretched thick with dread. A car door slammed somewhere, and an engine revved, a threat or a signal she couldn't tell. "Who's out there?" a woman's voice shouted again, closer this time. Emma caught the glint of a flashlight beam, slicing through the rain, probing the shadows along the fence line. The world shrank to the thin barrier of her walls, the threadbare hope that maybe, just maybe, she and Jack were invisible. She glanced at Jack. He was watching her with eyes too old for his face, haunted and wary, as if waiting for the inevitable betrayal. Emma's heart twisted. She thought of her own childhood, the icy certainty that adults didn't always save you. She knew in her bones what it meant to have nowhere left to run. The porch steps groaned. Someone was there. Emma felt a hot surge of panic. She motioned for Jack to stay quiet, then crept to the front hall, careful to keep out of sight. She could see a shadow moving behind the frosted glass of the door. There was a pause, a hand pale and sharp pressed against the pane. Emma's breath caught. The hand withdrew. The shadow retreated, and a moment later there was the wet slap of footsteps on the walkway, fading into the storm. Emma waited, her heart thundering in her ears. Only when she was certain they were gone did she move, inching back to the laundry room. Jack was still there, knees hugged to his chest, face streaked with rain, and something else. Fear, grief, or maybe just exhaustion. "You did great," she said softly, kneeling to his level. "You're safe now. No one saw you come in." He looked at her, not quite trusting, but something in his face eased just a little. "Don't tell them," he whispered again, voice raw, almost broken. "They'll come for me. They always do." Emma felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. She could call the police, or she could keep this boy's secret. Either choice was fraught. But looking at Jack so small, so determined not to be caught, she knew she couldn't turn him away. Not tonight. Not into a storm like this. The wind rattled the windows, and the house seemed to breathe around them, holding its secrets tight. Emma wrapped another towel around Jack's shoulders and brought him a glass of warm milk, her hands shaking only slightly. She found him a dry sweatshirt from her closet, a faded blue thing that dwarfed him, but he pulled it on gratefully. For a while, they just sat listening to the storm. Every time thunder cracked, Jack winced, glancing at the door, the windows, as if expecting them to burst open. Emma watched him, her mind racing. Who was chasing him? What had he seen? What kind of fear drove a child out into a night like this, into the arms of a stranger? Eventually, the shouts outside faded. The porch light glowed steady again, casting long, uncertain shadows across the kitchen floor. Jack's eyelids began to droop, the weight of exhaustion overtaking the panic. Emma fetched a blanket and a pillow, setting up a makeshift bed on the couch. She sat nearby, not touching, just a presence in the dark. The rain softened, tapping a gentler rhythm against the windows. Emma leaned back, eyes open to the dark. She could still hear the storm, but its fury felt further away now. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone in her house. The reasons were terrible. But as Jack's breathing slowed and his panic gave way to sleep, Emma felt a fragile resolve hardening in her chest. She would keep this child safe, at least for tonight, no matter what waited outside, pounding at the doors, searching the shadows, hungry and relentless. Tonight, Jack was safe. And Emma was ready. The rain had faded into a slow, steady drizzle, but inside Emma's living room, the storm had only just begun. Jack sat hunched on the edge of the couch, clutching the blanket around his shoulders, still shivering even though the house was warm. Emma could see it. The cold wasn't just in his skin, but in his bones, in the places bruises never fully heal. She moved quietly through the kitchen, making a mug of cocoa, not sure if it was for him or herself. When she handed it to him, Jack wrapped his hands around the cup, staring at the steam as if he could will himself somewhere safer. The silence stretched thin between them, vibrating with tension and secrets. Emma wanted to ask 100 questions, to demand answers, but the words caught in her throat. She watched Jack carefully, memorizing the angle of his hunched shoulders, the way his eyes never lingered in one place for long. It was a look she'd seen before in children who'd been told too often that speaking up only made things worse. Finally, in a voice so low, Emma had to lean forward to catch it. Jack spoke. "It's not safe at home," he whispered. The words landed like stones. Emma didn't move, afraid any sudden motion would send him fleeing back into himself. My mom and him, they get mad about everything." He squeezed his eyes shut, and Emma saw a flash of something else, shame maybe, or exhaustion, so deep it looked like surrender. "Sometimes they lock me in the basement. If I mess up, or if he says I'm lying. Or just because the dark is bad. It's cold and smells like old dirt. One time, I didn't know how long I was down there. She just left me. He said if I yelled, the neighbors would think I was crazy, that nobody would come." The words tumbled out, clumsy, half-choked by memory. Emma sat beside him, resisting the urge to reach out too soon. "Why tonight?" she asked softly. "What happened?" Jack's hands tightened around the mug. "He got home late. They started yelling. I broke a glass. It was an accident, but..." He grabbed me. Said if I wanted to act like a criminal, I could help them. That's what he says. That I have to help, or... He trailed off, eyes darting to the window. They want me to steal. From the store. From houses. I've done it before. He makes me. Emma's heart clenched, a hot surge of anger pushing through her helplessness. She'd heard stories like this, sure. Every teacher has. But it's different, infinitely worse, when it happens right in front of you. When it's a living, breathing child, shivering on your couch, so desperate for safety, he'd run barefoot through a thunderstorm. Jack's eyes met hers, then searching for a verdict. I didn't want to. I tried to say no. But if I don't, he says he'll make me disappear for real. That nobody would care. Emma fought to keep her own voice steady. Jack, what your mom and stepfather are doing, it isn't your fault. You don't deserve this. You know that, right? Jack shrugged, a tiny, hopeless gesture. If you say so. The light in the room was dim soft from the lamp Emma had left on for company. It cast long shadows up the wall, flickering with the wind outside. For a moment, the house seemed to shrink around them, the air heavy with words that had waited too long to be spoken. Jack's voice slipped into a monotone, as if telling the story meant detaching from it. Last month he made me break into a neighbor's shed. I didn't want to. I was scared, but he was watching from the window. He had his phone out. He said if I got caught, I was on my own. I took an old radio and some tools. The neighbor was mad. I heard him yelling the next day. I wanted to put it back, but he just laughed. Said I was finally useful. Emma wanted to scream to find Jack's parents and shake them until they understood what they'd done. But she didn't move. Instead, she reached out, finally placing a gentle hand over Jack's clenched fist. He froze but didn't pull away. I'm sorry, Jack, she whispered. I'm so sorry. He swallowed, jaw working. They said if I ever told anybody, nobody would believe me. Or they'd say it was my fault. That I was a thief. That's why I ran. He was going to take me somewhere tonight. Somewhere I wouldn't come back. Emma's blood ran cold. She squeezed his hand. They won't hurt you tonight. I promise. The quiet held them both fragile and absolute. Outside, the rain faded to a murmur. Emma felt the old house listening, as if the walls themselves were bearing witness to Jack's story. He stared at the floor, his voice barely a whisper. I just wanted them to stop. I thought if I did what they wanted, it'd be enough. But it never is. Emma moved closer, gathering him into an awkward, protective hug. For a second he stiffened, then allowed himself to lean in, pressing his face against her shoulder. His breath came in short, shuddering bursts. You're safe here, she murmured, rubbing his back the way she used to when her niece had nightmares. You're not alone, Jack. I won't let anything happen to you. He nodded, but the gesture was heavy, as if the effort of hope itself was too much. They sat like that for a long time. Emma holding Jack as if she could shield him from the weight of the world. When he pulled away, eyes red and face streaked with tears he'd tried to hide, she offered him another mug of cocoa. He sipped small and silent, but the tension in his shoulders had eased fractionally. Finally, Emma broke the silence. Jack, I need you to trust me just a little. We need to figure out what to do next. For tonight, no one will know you're here. Not your parents, not the neighbors, no one. We'll keep this between us. But if things get worse, or if you ever feel unsafe, I want you to tell me. Promise. Jack nodded. Okay. But what if they come looking? Emma hesitated, but her resolve hardened. Then we'll handle it together. I won't let them take you. Not without a fight. Jack wiped his nose on his sleeve, a flicker of a smile crossing his face for the first time. You're not like other grown-ups. Emma almost laughed, the sound sharp and brittle in the quiet. You'd be surprised how scared I am sometimes, too. The storm outside was a memory now. The only sound, the gentle tapping of rain against the glass. Emma tucked the blanket tighter around Jack, watching him sink back into the couch, exhaustion finally dragging him toward sleep. Before he drifted off, he glanced at her one more time, voice small but steady. Thank you for not making me go back. Thank you for believing me. Emma smiled, brushing a strand of damp hair from his forehead. Always, Jack, always. They made an unspoken pact that night, two lost souls sharing a secret, trusting that somehow, together they could outlast the darkness. Emma sat beside him until his breathing evened out, watching over him, her heart a tangle of fear, anger, and a fierce, unexpected hope. In that fragile hush, she allowed herself to believe maybe this broken place, this battered little house on the edge of Maplewood, could be a haven after all. Maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she needed to be, and so was Jack. Morning arrived reluctantly, a thin gray light seeping between the blinds and pushing back the shadows of the storm. Emma woke before sunrise, the memory of Jack's confessions heavy on her mind. Her body coiled with the kind of tension that doesn't fade with daylight. The boy was still asleep on the couch, curled tightly beneath a blanket, face half hidden, as if even in dreams he feared discovery. Emma slipped quietly to the window, peering between slats. The hush of the neighborhood so complete it felt staged. Maplewood had always looked safe at first glance, but the veneer of suburbia was already wearing thin for her. She saw the Evans house dark and still, curtains drawn tight, an ordinary house now forever altered in her mind. She brewed coffee strong and bitter, letting it warm her hands while she considered what to do. One thing was certain, she would not send Jack back. But what she should do next, who she could trust, what story to tell if someone asked, felt suddenly impossible to answer. Later that morning, she spotted the first sign. Out by the mailbox, a trio of teenagers she hadn't seen before leaned against their bikes, hoods up, despite the morning drizzle. They spoke in low, urgent tones, glancing over their shoulders every few seconds, sometimes laughing too loudly at nothing at all. One of them passed something small fast into another's palm, fingers brushing. It was gone before she could make out what it was. She watched from behind the curtain, careful not to be seen, heart quickening. Maplewood was a neighborhood where bikes should mean kids racing home after school, not whispered exchanges at dawn. Across the street, old Mrs. Fletcher was watering her impatience. She noticed the teens too, pausing for a beat too long before pretending not to care. Her mouth twisted, but she said nothing, and the watering can trembled in her grasp. Jack, now awake and alert, drifted into the kitchen, pale and silent. His eyes darted constantly toward the windows, the front door, then back to Emma's face. When a branch tapped against the glass, he flinched so hard he almost dropped his mug. She tried to keep her voice calm, offered him eggs, toast, a safe routine. He shook his head, picking at a corner of the counter, restless, haunted. The boy would not stand near the windows. Every time a car rolled past, he froze. They kept the curtains closed, lights low. Emma found herself holding her breath whenever someone passed, measuring the footsteps, wondering if they would stop at her house. By noon, the unease in the neighborhood had thickened like a storm that never really left. More strangers, teenagers, a few older men appeared in twos and threes, always hovering at the edges, always with eyes that didn't match their forced smiles. A black sedan idled at the end of the block for nearly half an hour, engine running, the driver staring straight ahead, not even pretending to check his phone. A woman in running gear jogged by, glancing at the car, her pace faltering for a moment before she forced herself to continue. Emma's phone vibrated, a text from Miller. "Everything all right over there? Just checking in? Let me know if you need anything." It was the third time he'd reached out since sunrise. Twice he'd already appeared at her doorstep, one time with a basket of scones, another with a stack of neighborhood newsletters, and an overly casual, "just making sure you're settling in." His eyes, so warm and open on their own, now felt like searchlights sweeping over her, as if measuring her words, her movements. He'd lingered in her foyer, glancing at the closed door to the living room, asking offhand, "You haven't seen anything odd lately, have you?" Emma had replied quickly, "Not really, just getting used to everything," her pulse drumming in her neck. He'd smiled too long and left with a wave. Now the frequency of his concern struck her as less neighborly and more strategic. By early afternoon, Emma felt eyes everywhere. She knew fear could invent patterns, but she also trusted her gut. Something was wrong. She sat at the kitchen table, the remains of lunch untouched, Jack across from her, biting his nails to the quick. She decided quietly to do something. She dug through an old moving box until she found the tiny security camera her brother had given her the Christmas before, a gift she'd never expected to use. The device was barely larger than a thumb drive, with adhesive tape and a grainy lens, crude but enough. She set it up behind the curtain facing the street, angling it to capture the front yard and a sliver of the Evans house. Jack watched her, anxious. Will they know? Emma shook her head, keeping her voice low. No one will see it. It's just for us, just in case. She began taking notes, jotting down times and descriptions on a yellow legal pad. 12 a.m. 3 teens black hoodies. 9:45 a.m. Sedan plates obscured. 10:30 a.m. Miller visit number 2, carrying newspaper. No eye contact with Jack. She sketched a map of the block, marking where she'd seen each stranger, each odd car. The pattern forming in her notes sent a chill down her spine. Jack grew more nervous with each entry. He spent most of the afternoon in the hallway, crouched behind the banister, listening for every sound. When the mail slot clattered, he nearly bolted for the closet. Emma tried to keep him busy board games, TV, even suggesting they bake cookies. But he couldn't relax. They look through the windows, he whispered once. They can see me if I move. He told me he'd always know where I was. Emma wanted to promise he was wrong, but she couldn't. She checked the doors again, locked the back gate, turned off the porch light. She taught Jack to move quietly through the house to avoid the windows, to freeze if the doorbell rang. Outside, the mood shifted. Neighbors gathered in little clusters, their voices pitched low, eyes darting to Emma's house, then away. Mrs. Fletcher exchanged a few hurried words with another woman, both looking worried, then crossed the street and knocked at Miller's door. Miller emerged, ever the pillar of calm, listening intently, offering a reassuring hand on Mrs. Fletcher's shoulder. The show of neighborliness was just that, a show. Emma could see the tension in their posture, the way Miller's eyes flicked, assessing every corner of the street. In the late afternoon, the air felt sharp electric. Emma stood by the window, watching as the teenagers from earlier returned, this time lingering outside the Evans house, whispering and shoving each other. They seemed to be waiting for a signal. One of them glanced at Emma's window, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. The boy's expression was hard, cold, far too knowing for his age. Jack saw the look on Emma's face and curled deeper into himself, wrapping his arms around his knees. If they find me, he whispered, voice barely audible. They won't, Emma replied, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She reached out, covering his hand with hers, trying to lend him some of the steadiness she pretended to feel. Miller dropped by once more at dusk with a Tupperware of soup and another check-in lingering in the entryway, just long enough to make Emma uncomfortable. Strange times, he said, eyes steady. Let me know if you see anything. You never know who's watching these days. The words hung in the air, heavier than the soup. Emma nodded, watching him disappear down the path. She locked the door behind him and checked the camera feed, grainy figures moving in and out of shadows. Faces half obscured the street, alive with quiet, secret exchanges. As darkness fell, Emma and Jack retreated to the back of the house, moving softly, every step a calculated risk. She checked the legal pad again, memorizing the patterns. She knew she should call someone, police, social services, but the fear that had gripped Jack was infectious, paralyzing. That night, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Emma lay awake, listening to every creak and rustle, aware now that Maplewood was not what it seemed. Outside, figures moved along the sidewalk, too many, too often. Inside, Jack flinched at every shadow. Neither of them slept. The only thing that kept Emma going was the certainty that whatever was happening in Maplewood, she would not abandon Jack. Not for anything. Not for anyone. She would watch. She would wait. She would fight if she had to. Even in the dark. Even if the whole world was watching. Sunlight crept over the rooftops, warmer than the day before, as if the world was trying to apologize for everything that had come before. In Emma's kitchen, the air smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. A contrast so sharp to the fear of the past 24 hours that Jack hardly knew how to respond to it. He sat at the small breakfast table, fidgeting with the hem of his borrowed sweatshirt, trying to look anywhere but at Emma, who was busy at the stove, humming tunelessly. Emma glanced over her shoulder and saw Jack's thin frame hunched, like he was trying to fold himself into invisibility. She turned down the heat on the oatmeal, wiped her hands on a towel, and crossed to the table. "You hungry?" she asked softly, as if loud noises might make him vanish. Jack gave a little nod, not quite meeting her eyes. She ladled oatmeal into 2 bowls and slid one in front of him, adding a little swirl of honey. "It's nothing fancy, but it's warm," she said. "And you don't have to eat if you don't want to." He took a tentative bite, surprised by how good it tasted. "Thank you," he whispered, voice hoarse from all the words he hadn't spoken in weeks. They ate in near silence. Emma filled it with gentle conversation about the weather, her first impressions of Maplewood, and the best way to spot chickadees at the bird feeder. Jack listened, drawn in despite himself. Each time Emma made him smile, she marked it down in her heart like a small victory. After breakfast, Emma coaxed Jack to help her clean up. She handed him a dish towel, and they dried the plates together, moving quietly in a rhythm that felt, if not quite familial, at least easy. When a fork clattered to the floor, Jack startled, then caught Emma's gentle smile and relaxed again. Emma recognized this kind of skittishness. Once long ago, she'd lived with it herself, the way a sudden sound could jerk a person back to memories they couldn't escape. She didn't ask about Jack's scars or the shadows beneath his eyes. Instead, she talked about small, ordinary things, the way her mother had taught her to make bread the time she'd tried to keep a goldfish alive and failed. She let the quiet grow comfortable. They moved into the living room. Jack glanced at the piano in the corner. Its surface dusted a metronome perched on top like an artifact. "Do you play?" he asked, almost shy. Emma hesitated. "Not well," she admitted. "I used to before." She trailed off, but the ache in her voice lingered. Jack nodded, sensing the edge of something he didn't want to touch. "My grandma had a piano," he offered. "It was really old. Sometimes she'd let me press the keys, but she said I was too little to learn." Emma smiled, turning to him. "You're not too little now. Want to try?" He bit his lip, but curiosity won out. Emma lifted the lid and pressed a single key. The sound was soft and imperfect, but the notes hung in the air like hope. She patted the bench beside her, and Jack slid in, eyes wide with anticipation and nerves. She taught him the basics, the names of the keys, the way to hold his fingers. Jack fumbled, hesitated, then found a rhythm, the simple pattern of C, D, E, F, G. "Like that?" he asked. "Exactly like that." Emma grinned her praise, soft but genuine. "You're a natural." For a while they played together. Simple melodies, a two-note waltz, laughter breaking through when Jack missed a note and Emma feigned dramatic shock. The walls that fear had built between them softened. Jack's face brightened, the creases at his brows smoothing as he let the music fill the spaces where anxiety usually lived. Later, while Jack thumbed through a book of beginner songs, Emma gathered her courage. She sat on the floor beside the piano bench and told Jack about her own son, how she'd lost him years ago, a sickness no doctor could fix. Her voice was careful, but she didn't flinch from the pain. "Some days," she said, "it feels like a story I heard about someone else. Some days, it's the only thing I can remember." Jack didn't know what to say, but he nodded, the gravity of her confession settling over him. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Emma squeezed his hand. "Me too, Jack. But we're both still here. We both have to try even when it hurts." He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "My grandma used to make cinnamon rolls when I was little. She said the smell meant the weekend was here. I liked helping her stir the dough, but she always said I put in too much flour." His lips curled into a hesitant smile. "I haven't seen her or Grandpa since I came to Vancouver." Emma sensed the longing behind his words, the ache for something lost, for family that meant safety. "Would you like to see them again?" Jack nodded so hard his hair flopped into his eyes. "More than anything, I don't even know if they still live in the same place. My mom said they didn't want me anymore, but I don't believe her." "Neither do I," Emma said gently. "Maybe we can try to find them when you're ready." Jack's eyes shone with hope and something like disbelief, as if he'd never considered that the future could contain anything good. For the first time since arriving, he let himself imagine it, a house that smelled of cinnamon and bread mornings with someone who wanted him around. Emma moved around him, straightening up the sheet music, but her thoughts spun in circles. The more she learned about Jack's life, the more determined she became. She wouldn't let him disappear, not into fear, not into the cracks of Maplewood. That afternoon, the tension that had stalked their steps softened. Emma baked banana bread, letting Jack mash the bananas and pour in the chocolate chips. She cracked jokes about the great bread disaster of '07, and Jack actually giggled, flour dusting his nose. When the loaf was done, they shared slices at the table, eating with their hands, laughing when the chocolate left streaks on their fingers. In the fading light, Jack talked about his grandparents. Again, memories of fishing at the lake, picking raspberries in the summer, falling asleep in the back seat while Grandpa sang old country songs. Emma listened with her whole heart, cataloging every detail, letting Jack reclaim those pieces of happiness. After dinner, they returned to the piano. Emma played a gentle lullaby, one she hadn't touched since her own son was small. The melody drifted through the house, sweet and bittersweet, weaving safety around them both. Jack watched her fingers, then joined in hesitantly, at first, then bolder, trusting the music more than words. As night crept in, the outside world fell away. For the first time, Jack didn't jump at every creak or shadow. Emma read to him from an old book, her voice steady, anchoring him in the now. When he finally fell asleep on the couch, Emma tucked the blanket around him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. She sat beside him for a long while, letting herself feel the fragile hope that threaded through the silence. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not a miracle, but the slow work of trust, of showing up for each other, one small kindness at a time. Outside, the stars blinked to life above Maplewood. Inside, two souls found their way, note by note, toward the possibility of family again. It started with the pounding of fists on wood, a desperate animal sound that ripped through the drowsy hush of late afternoon. Emma had just finished washing the banana bread pan when the first knock came hard enough to rattle the dishes in the drying rack. She froze, dish towel limp in her hand, heart stuttering, and caught Jack's wide-eyed panic from across the kitchen. They both knew instantly what it meant. No one knocked like that, unless they were searching, demanding, claiming something lost. Emma whispered, "Go upstairs. My bedroom. Closet. Don't come out unless I get you." Jack shot from his seat, feet nearly silent on the old boards, and vanished up the narrow staircase. The tension in the air left a taste like metal on her tongue. Another barrage at the front door, louder now, as if whoever was outside meant to splinter the frame. Emma pressed her palms against the countertop, centering herself, letting her face settle into polite neutrality. She wiped her hands, took one measured breath, and opened the door. On the porch, Jack's mother stood in a fury, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, eyes burning. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful, and her lips were a slash of red across skin gone pale with worry or rage. Beside her loomed the stepfather, thick-shouldered and sullen, his gaze sliding over Emma's face with open suspicion. Dr. Miller stood just behind them, arms folded, watching everything with unsettling calm. "Emma," Jack's mother said, voice trembling between tears and accusation, "I need your help. Jack's missing. He's not in his room. He's gone." She took a step closer, breath ragged. "Have you seen him? Have you talked to him? He was upset, and now I can't find him anywhere." The stepfather cut in, voice rough. "He runs off sometimes, but he always comes back. You haven't seen him, have you?" The way he said it, there was no space for innocence. It was an accusation dressed as a question. Emma met their eyes steady, though her heart hammered so loudly she was sure they could hear it. "No, I haven't. I'm so sorry. I've just been inside cleaning up. I thought I saw him riding his bike earlier, but it was raining so hard, I must have been mistaken." Jack's mother's gaze narrowed. "Are you sure he likes your house? He told me you were nice." The words twisted, barbed with suspicion. Emma held the woman's stare, refusing to give ground. Dr. Miller cleared his throat, interjecting with measured calm. "Maybe we should split up, check with the other neighbors. I'll look down by the park." His eyes lingered on Emma's face, sharp and searching. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink, every movement loaded with danger. The stepfather moved closer, looking past Emma into her hallway. "Mind if I check your backyard? Jack hides there sometimes. He likes the old tree, right?" Emma's pulse quickened. "I haven't seen him, but you're welcome to look. I'll check the basement. Maybe he wandered over and fell asleep somewhere." The lie tasted sour, but it was necessary. She stepped aside just enough to let him pass, praying Jack was hidden well enough upstairs. The three of them moved through her house with the uneasy choreography of distrust. Miller lingered by the door, offering Emma a too-kind smile. It must be stressful, all these new faces and old secrets, he murmured just loud enough for her to hear. The words hung between them, ambiguous and chilling. Jack's mother pushed through the kitchen, peering behind curtains, flinging open closet doors. The stepfather circled the yard, scanning every shadow, pausing too long by the garden shed. Emma moved with them, her skin prickling with every step. She invented small talk, masking her fear. "Jack really is a good kid," she said, filling the silence. "I'm sure he'll come back soon." Jack's mother rounded on her, suddenly raw. "You don't know him," she hissed. "You don't know what he's capable of. He lies. He steals. He brings trouble." The stepfather returned, shaking his head, his eyes cold and flat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Emma could feel Miller's gaze heavy on the side of her face. Then, as suddenly as they'd arrived, Jack's parents seemed to deflate. "Let us know if you see anything." Jack's mother muttered, her anger spent. "We just want him home." Emma nodded, clutching the doorframe, and watched as they retreated down the walk, Miller pausing to look back one last time. She let the door swing shut, sagging against it, every muscle trembling with relief and terror. She waited until the footsteps faded, then raced upstairs. Jack was in the closet, knees hugged to his chest, face streaked with silent tears. Emma knelt beside him, pressing a hand to his back. "You did so well," she whispered. "They're gone. For now." He nodded, jaw set tight, bravado cracked by fear. "She'll come back," he whispered. "They always do." Dusk fell with an unnatural haste, turning every window into a mirror. Emma moved through the house, locking doors, checking every latch twice. Jack hovered behind her, silent as a shadow. Night pressed in. The air thickened with dread. Every sound magnified: the creak of floorboards, the whine of pipes, the sigh of wind against glass. Emma brewed tea, hands shaking so badly she spilled leaves across the counter. Then, just as Jack was drifting to sleep on the couch, a sound outside, soft, deliberate scraping, made Emma's blood run cold. She froze, every instinct on high alert. The back porch creaked. Footsteps too heavy to be the wind padded across the deck. Emma killed the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. She gestured for Jack to stay low, her heart pounding. A shadow moved outside the window, a hand brushed against the glass. Someone rattled the doorknob, then jimmied it with a tool, the metal-on-metal whine scraping across Emma's nerves. She grabbed her phone, thumb trembling as she typed a message to Miller. "Someone's at my back door. Did you see anyone outside?" There was no response. The figure at the door grew bolder, testing the frame, then pressing hard enough that the wood groaned. Emma's mind raced. Should she call the police? But what would she say? She hadn't seen a face, just intent, just danger. She crept to the kitchen, grabbed a heavy frying pan, and took position near the door. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the sound stopped. The footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate, crunching over gravel. Emma inched to the window, peering through a slit in the blinds. In the moonlight, a figure in a dark hoodie melted into the hedge. She caught a glint of something, a flashlight or a phone. Jack appeared at her elbow, eyes huge and terrified. "Is it them?" Emma swallowed. "I don't know, honey. But you're safe here. I promise." But she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. The night was thick with secrets. The enemy was no longer just outside. It was everywhere, pressing in, looking for cracks. Emma kept watch by the window until dawn, never daring to close her eyes, praying she could protect Jack from the storm now gathering at their door. Sleep was little more than a rumor that night. Emma hovered at the window until the sun burned the mist off the lawns, her mind working the same tired questions over and over. By the time Jack wandered into the kitchen, rumpled and bleary, Emma had already checked the locks 3 times, started and abandoned 2 cups of coffee, and written down a list of every car and stranger she'd seen from her window since dawn. She wanted to believe the worst was behind them. But beneath her ribs, dread pulsed like a second heartbeat. Jack was quieter than usual, shrinking from the window, glancing at his phone, a battered, sticker-plastered thing that Emma only allowed when it was set to silent. He picked at his oatmeal, barely eating. Emma could sense his anxiety, how it wormed into the spaces between their words. She asked him about the video game he'd mentioned yesterday, but he barely replied. The neighborhood looked peaceful enough in the pale light. But the longer Emma watched, the more she noticed the same black sedan from before parked 2 houses down, its tinted windows, blank as closed eyes. A man in a baseball cap standing at the end of the block for almost 20 minutes, pretending to check his phone but always glancing back toward her house. Teenagers in hoodies moved in small, tight knots, whispering to each other in the spaces between front porches and mailbox shadows. All the while, the Evans house across the street remained dark and silent. Emma decided she couldn't afford to be passive. While Jack dozed on the couch, she slipped out the back door and circled her own property, searching for any sign they'd been watched. At the edge of her yard, she found a cigarette butt still warm and scuffed footprints in the mulch beneath her kitchen window. Someone had been close. Too close. Inside, she checked the camera footage she'd installed fast-forwarding through hours of nothing, until at 3:37 a.m., the image glitched. For a few seconds, a shadow blotted out the porch light, moving swiftly, then gone. There was no face, no detail, just the unmistakable shape of a person too close to her door. She saved the file fingers, shaking. The unease didn't fade as the day wore on. Emma began to notice things she'd missed before, conversations in the street that stopped when she approached, glances exchanged over coffee cups on porches, neighbors who no longer waved when she passed by. She saw Miller standing on his lawn, phone to his ear, murmuring something with his back turned. When she met his gaze, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. She returned inside and began poking around on the neighborhood Facebook group, searching for anything odd. Among the posts about lost dogs and block parties, she found a thread that set her nerves on edge, a list of garage sales and swaps, always coded with odd phrases. Midnight trade, extra keys, bring the red bag. It meant nothing and everything. Another post listed an address, Mrs. Fletcher's, next to the phrase delivery on Friday. Emma felt a chill recalling the strange visitors and late-night activity on that block. Her phone buzzed with a new notification, an anonymous number, no name. She hesitated, thumb hovering, then opened the message. Stay out of things that aren't yours. Stop asking questions. The message vanished a second later, deleted from her inbox as if it had never existed. Emma felt her mouth go dry. She stood, phone still clutched tight, and turned to see Miller outside her window, waving with a neighborly smile that now looked like a mask. A moment later, he was at her door, a single knock. Then his voice soft, reassuring, just on the edge of threatening. Emma, you all right in there? Haven't seen you out much. Everything okay with Jack? He let the name hang there, loaded and obvious. Emma schooled her face into a smile, cracked the door but kept the chain latched. We're fine, thanks. Jack's feeling under the weather. Just a bug going around. She made her voice sound casual, breezy, though her insides twisted. Miller's eyes flickered, catching the lie. He leaned a little closer, voice dropping to a low hum. You let me know if you see anything strange, all right? Neighborhood's not as quiet as it used to be. For a heartbeat, the facade slipped and she saw something cold flicker behind his eyes. Calculation threat or simply knowledge? He stepped back, smile snapping into place. Take care, Emma. She closed the door, pressing her back against it, fighting the urge to bolt every lock in the house. When she checked her phone, the anonymous number was already gone from her call log. A few hours later, Jack broke the silence. He was pacing, wringing his hands, unable to sit still. It's my fault, he whispered. They're looking for me because of what I know, because of what they made me do. Emma crouched to his level, gentle but insistent. Jack, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. He shook his head, tears glittering. You don't get it. The stuff they made me take, sometimes it was just phones or cash. But last time they made me go inside Mrs. Fletcher's house. They said she was hiding something for someone else's money, I think. They said if I didn't help, they'd hurt her. Or me. His voice broke raw and desperate. I saw Miller there. He was talking to my stepdad, and they were laughing. Like it was all a game, but it wasn't. I heard them talking about the next job, about a shipment coming in, and that someone new needed to be scared into silence. I didn't understand, but I knew they were bad people. Emma's skin prickled. Did you see or hear anything else? Something specific? Jack shook his head, brow furrowed. I just know it's soon. They kept saying Friday night that everyone had to be ready, and that nobody could mess it up, or they'd disappear too. He looked up, panic blooming in his eyes. Mrs. Fletcher, she's just nice. She gives me cookies. She doesn't deserve this. Emma swallowed her own fear, masking it with resolve. Jack, we're going to figure this out. But you have to trust me. No matter what you hear, no matter who knocks on the door, you don't answer. You stay out of sight. Promise me. Jack nodded, but the tension never left his body. The day dragged heavy and oppressive. Emma double-checked the camera feeds, her notes, her phone each time, expecting to find a new threat, a new warning. She could feel Miller's gaze on her from across the street, a silent promise that nothing in Maplewood was ever truly secret. That night, as she tucked Jack in, Emma sat beside him until he drifted off, his breathing shallow and fitful. She wanted to promise him that everything would be all right, but she'd lived too long to believe in easy assurances. Instead, she rose and paced the house, every shadow a possible enemy, every creak of the old floorboards a warning. The world outside was no longer safe. The lines between neighbors and predators had blurred, and in the morning, she knew the true game would begin. The darkness in Maplewood no longer felt like the gentle, familiar hush of suburban nights. It pressed against Emma's windows with purpose, every shadow sharpened by the knowledge that someone somewhere was always watching. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. Not when the next move could mean the difference between rescue and ruin. The living room was littered with evidence of her vigilance, a jumble of notes, snapshots from her security camera, and Jack's trembling handwriting describing voices in the dark. At 2 a.m., Emma stood at the kitchen counter, her laptop glowing blue in the otherwise black room. Jack's confession about the coming shipment, the coded messages, and Miller's constant lurking had set her nerves on edge. Worse, the anonymous threat from earlier still clung to her skin like sweat. She knew now there was no one in Maplewood she could trust, not the neighbors, not the local precinct, not even the friendly dispatcher who'd once waved to her at the farmer's market. Every instinct screamed that this neighborhood had its own rules and its own alliances. Emma scrolled through her evidence video clips of the black sedan. A close-up, blurry but telling of Miller exchanging something with Jack's stepfather. The text chain from the neighborhood Facebook group full of odd phrases and warnings about outsiders. If she called the police directly, would her message even reach the right hands? Or would it be intercepted by whoever was feeding information to the other side? She thought of her brother, a police officer back in Edmonton. A man who'd once told her that every town has its secrets, and some are too tangled for outsiders to see. She pulled up his number fingers, hovering, then stopped. If she called him, she'd drag her family into this too. Instead, she made a choice: upload everything anonymously to the Vancouver police tip line. She wiped the files of metadata, scrambled her IP with a VPN, and sent it all: videos, notes, times, names, along with a plea for help. Do not trust Maplewood Precinct. Request undercover response. Her hands shook as she closed her laptop. It wasn't enough, she knew. It might never be enough. But it was all she had. She left the laptop open on the kitchen table, the "thank you for your tip" confirmation blinking uselessly at her from the screen. Upstairs, Jack was packing his small backpack. Emma tried to keep her voice calm. Only the essentials, she whispered. Nothing that'll slow us down. She handed him a new flashlight, a granola bar, an extra sweater. She showed him how to stuff socks into shoes to muffle footsteps. You'll want layers, she said. It'll get cold out there at night. They worked in silence, the language of fugitives, efficient, unsentimental. Emma packed her own bag, copies of the evidence on 2 separate thumb drives, one to take and one to leave behind. She tucked a first aid kit into the bottom, then moved through the house. Placing makeshift alarm cans tied to string on doorknobs, a portable motion sensor in the backyard. Her phone set to vibrate at the softest noise. It wasn't foolproof, but it would have to do. At the kitchen table, they spread out a hand-drawn map of Maplewood, marking every alley, every yard with tall hedges, every streetlight that had burned out in the last week. If we get separated, Emma said, Go to the playground behind St. Matthew's. Stay hidden. Wait for me or for a police officer, but only if you see a badge and hear the code word." She made him repeat the word 3 times, "Firefly, firefly, firefly," until she was sure he'd remember it. Jack's hands were trembling. What if they catch us? What if Miller figures it out? Emma's heart twisted. She reached for his hands, squeezing them tight. "We're going to be careful. We're going to be smart. And if anything happens, you run. Don't worry about me. Just run, Jack." He shook his head fiercely. "I can't leave you. If I hadn't come here, none of this would have happened." Emma crouched to his level, her voice firm. "Listen to me. You did nothing wrong. I would do this again 1,000 times over. But you have to promise if I say go, you go. No looking back." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. "They'll hurt you. They always hurt people who help me. My grandpa tried to take me once. They put him in the hospital." Emma swallowed hard. "I'm not your grandpa. And I'm not alone." She didn't say it was a lie. She couldn't afford to believe in loneliness, not now. "We have a plan. We have proof. That's more than they know." They fell into a silent rhythm, packing and checking, repacking and rehearsing what they'd do if someone came to the door, if the lights went out, if the phone lines went dead. Emma showed Jack how to use the pepper spray, how to dial 911 on her phone with a single tap. The minutes crawled by, each one thick with tension. Outside, the wind picked up, making the maple branches scrape against the siding. It could have been anything, the storm, a raccoon, the world just carrying on. But Emma didn't believe in coincidences anymore. At 3:23 a.m., a shadow flitted past the living room window. Emma caught the movement out of the corner of her eye, pressing her back flat against the wall. She dared a peek through the curtain. There, standing just beyond the porch light's reach, was Miller. His silhouette was unmistakable, the old wool coat, the stooped posture, hands in pockets like any tired old man, except his face was turned directly toward Emma's window, eyes gleaming with cold intent. He didn't move, didn't knock, just watched. For one terrible second, Emma was sure he could see through the glass, through the darkness, through every shield she'd put between her and the world. Her skin prickled, but she forced herself not to blink. Miller tilted his head as if acknowledging her. A silent warning. A reminder that Maplewood's secrets were not meant to survive the daylight. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, he melted into the night, gone without a sound, as if he'd never been there at all. Emma exhaled, forcing her lungs to work. She turned to Jack, who'd been holding his breath, eyes locked on the hallway. "He saw us, didn't he?" Jack whispered, voice cracking. Emma didn't answer directly. "We're leaving at first light. We'll use the alleys cut behind the school, avoid the main road. I want you ready to run." "Okay." Jack nodded, resolve flickering in the face of his terror. The rest of the night, they sat together in the living room. The makeshift alarm set the bags packed, the world shrinking to the square of light cast by a single lamp. Emma held Jack's hand as the hours crept by. Outside Maplewood was a graveyard, of secrets, every window a blank eye. As dawn bled into the sky, Emma checked the back door one last time. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she had no choice but to trust their plan, their courage and the faint hope that someone, anyone, would answer her call for help. The storm was coming. She just prayed they'd survive the night and find the world waiting on the other side. The sky outside was a bruised electric blue dawn, not yet broken, but the world holding its breath as if waiting for a storm. Inside Emma's house, the air was just as tight, every creak of the old floors echoing in her spine. The hours before daylight had been a study in suspense, Jack curled in a ball under the kitchen table, clutching his backpack. Emma sitting at the window, a flashlight and heavy book beside her, alert to every flicker in the dark. They'd spoken in whispers, then not at all the silence between them, full of what-ifs and dread. At 4:12 a.m., the world shifted. The feed from Emma's security camera, a lifeline, her one eye to the world, flickered, then cut to static. She checked the laptop twice, then a third time, unplugging and rebooting with trembling fingers, but the image was gone. She pulled up the last saved footage, and her heart stuttered, a gloved hand reaching up, lens filling with black before the feed vanished. Someone was out there. Someone had seen the camera and wanted her blind. She reached for her phone, already forming the words she'd use for emergency dispatch. But her screen showed nothing but no service. The bars vanished, replaced by a red X. She moved to the kitchen, tried the landline. Dead, just a hum of silence. Every form of contact with the outside world had been severed in a single calculated moment. Maplewood had never felt farther from civilization. Jack sensed the change, his body tense, eyes wide, as he scanned Emma's face. "Is it broken?" he whispered. Emma nodded, mouth dry. "Stay put. Don't move unless I say so. Not for anything." There was a sudden hush outside, as if the whole neighborhood was listening. And then the footsteps began slow, measured moving with purpose across gravel and grass. Emma's heart pounded in her ears. She flicked off the kitchen light and pressed her back to the wall, peering through the slats of the window. In the pre-dawn gloom, she saw shapes flitting through her backyard, one tall, one short, both moving like men who knew the ground beneath their feet. The porch boards groaned. A flashlight beam swept across the curtains, slicing the dark in two. Emma held her breath, sweat pooling in the small of her back. She watched as the figures tested the side gate, then circled to the back door. The motion sensor alarm she'd rigged earlier triggered a soft, shrill beep that sounded pathetically small against the threat. But the intruders paused, exchanging whispered words, too quiet to catch. One produced a thin crowbar, jamming it into the doorframe. The wood shuddered, but didn't break. Emma moved quickly, silently, scooping Jack from under the table and guiding him into the tiny gap between the pantry and the fridge. "Don't move. Don't make a sound. No matter what happens, I'll come for you," she whispered, her hands shaking as she tucked him out of sight. The pounding at the door grew louder. Emma grabbed the heaviest pan she could find and tiptoed back to the kitchen, knees threatening to buckle. She'd faced down 100 kinds of grief in her life, but nothing had ever felt this raw, this immediate. Her home, her last safe place, invaded by fear. Suddenly the banging stopped. For a moment the house was still again, and Emma wondered if the danger had passed. She listened, holding her breath. Then the knock at the front door. Calm, measured, polite. Emma froze, instinct screaming. She peeked through the peephole. There, framed in the yellow glow of her porch light, stood Dr. Miller. He looked almost grandfatherly in the half-light hair, tousled coat buttoned against the cold. But his eyes, sharp, predatory, scanned the house with practiced ease. He rapped again, then called out in a tone that was just a shade too pleasant. "Emma, sorry to bother you so early. Mind if I come in?" Emma swallowed, fighting down the panic that wanted to drive her screaming from the house. She unlatched the chain, but didn't open the door all the way. "Dr. Miller, is everything all right?" He smiled, a flash of teeth that never quite touched his eyes. "Oh, I'm fine. Just saw some movement on your porch from across the street. Thought I'd check on you. Funny things happening around here lately, don't you think?" Emma kept her expression neutral, the door between them a thin shield. "Probably raccoons. Or the wind. I haven't noticed anything unusual." She prayed her voice didn't shake. Miller's eyes narrowed, glancing past her shoulder, as if he could see the shape of Jack cowering in the kitchen. "No strange visitors? No trouble?" he asked, his tone soft, almost intimate. Emma shook her head, willing herself not to blink, not to give anything away. "Nothing but the usual. Just me and a pot of burnt coffee." A moment's silence stretched too long. Miller leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "You know, Emma, sometimes we think we know our neighbors. But this town, it's full of secrets." His gaze was cold, measuring. "If you ever see anything out of the ordinary, you'll let me know, won't you?" She forced a small smile. "Of course. I'll be sure to call." Her knuckles whitened on the edge of the door. Miller nodded, stepping back, but his eyes lingered. "Take care, Emma. Watch yourself." He disappeared down the walk, the polite doctor once more. But the threat in his words hung in the air like smoke. Emma shut the door, locked every bolt, and slid to the floor, chest heaving. Jack crawled out from his hiding place, his whole body shaking. Emma wrapped her arms around him, heart thundering. "Is he gone?" Jack choked out. "For now," Emma whispered, voice barely holding together. "But he'll be back. We have to move soon." All around them, the house creaked and groaned. Emma listened, every sense straining for any sign of return. The camera was dead. The phone was dead. They were alone but not unseen. The dawn crept in pale and uncertain. The outside world, so recently threatening, was now their only hope. Inside, Emma made a promise to Jack, to herself, that she would not let Miller or anyone else win. Not tonight. Not ever. The street was dead quiet after sunrise, a silence that felt like a warning, not a mercy. By noon, Emma and Jack knew it was now or never. Every plan they'd made, every night spent listening to footsteps outside, led to this. Miller was too careful, too cruel to leave evidence lying in the open, but Jack's frightened whispers about the office in the basement and all those men in black coats echoed in Emma's head. She knew what she was about to do bordered on insanity. But after last night's confrontation, there was no retreat. They waited until Miller's ancient Volvo rumbled away toward the far end of the block. Emma watched through binoculars, counting the seconds, noting how long it took the car to disappear past the bakery. Jack's hands trembled as he zipped his backpack and slid a screwdriver into his sleeve. "If we get caught," he began. "We won't." Emma lied, hoping her voice didn't betray the thundering of her heart. "Just remember what we practiced." They crossed the street with practiced casualness, a pair of neighbors out for an innocent stroll. Miller's garden was overgrown, the hedges thick and wild, offering just enough cover. Jack ducked low as Emma slid a gloved hand under the loose brick beside the porch, just as he'd described. She found the hidden key heart hammering and eased it into the lock. Inside Miller's house was colder, darker than Emma expected. The curtains were drawn, muffling daylight to a pale smear. The living room was meticulous family photos, an overstuffed armchair, a row of porcelain birds. But underneath the dusted surfaces, the air was heavy with secrets. They crept down the hall, shoes soundless on the thick runner. Emma signaled for Jack to wait as she cracked open a door at the back. It was an office walls lined with medical books and locked filing cabinets. But on the desk, a black leather-bound notebook opened and covered in Miller's meticulous spidery script. Emma pulled her phone and snapped photos of every page, barely registering the coded language, dates, some initials, addresses, lists of deliveries, and pickups. The last page made her breath catch. Friday, 7:30 p.m. Shipment arrival. JE involvement required final warning. Her blood ran cold. She turned to Jack, ready to leave, but he was tugging at her sleeve, eyes wide, motioning desperately toward the back of the house. Downstairs, he mouthed. The meetings. He hides stuff there. Emma hesitated only a moment. The front door was still the street outside, undisturbed. They slipped through the kitchen and found the basement stairs. The air down there was colder, still damp concrete, the faint chemical scent of bleach. Emma flicked her flashlight low, sweeping the shadows. The walls were lined with storage bins and old medical supplies. But in the far corner behind a sheet of plywood was a locked steel cabinet. Jack knelt quickly, using the screwdriver to pry at the loose hasp. The lock popped free. Inside, a stack of manila envelopes, a handful of USB sticks, an old tape recorder. Emma grabbed everything, shoving them into her bag, but froze as footsteps echoed above. Someone was home. She looked at Jack. Closet now. They dove into a storage closet full of mothballs and scratchy winter coats, hearts pounding in unison. Heavy boots thudded above them. A man's voice, deep annoyed, spoke on the phone, too muffled to make out. The footsteps moved closer, lingered at the top of the basement stairs, then retreated. Emma counted every step, daring to breathe, only when she heard the slam of the front door. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. They burst from the closet, raced up the stairs, and slipped out the back door, barely pausing to relock it behind them. By the time they reached their own yard, Emma's hands shook so badly she could hardly fit the key in her own door. Safe at last, they spilled into the kitchen, gasping for breath. Jack's face was white, but fierce with adrenaline. "We did it," he whispered. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She dumped the haul on the table, the notebook, the envelopes, the tape recorder, the USB sticks. The first stick, when plugged into her laptop, played a single file, a scratchy recording of Miller's voice, calm and unmistakable, outlining the details of a shipment, the bribing of local officers, and threats against anyone who talks, anyone who helps. There were other voices too, Jack's stepfather, men from the neighborhood, all plotting and laughing, as if discussing nothing more serious than a bake sale. Emma felt sick. The evidence was beyond anything she'd dared hope for, but it was also dangerous, a death sentence if Miller found out what they'd taken. Jack stared at the screen, hands clenched in fists. That's them. That's all of them. You can stop them now, right? Emma forced herself to be calm, to look strong for Jack. We're close. This is what we needed. But we can't let anyone know we have it. Not yet. Jack wiped his face, trying to hide the tears that came anyway. I thought I'd be scared forever, he said quietly. But now I just want them to be scared for once. Emma knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his face. They will be. We just need to hold on. It's almost over. But as she powered off the laptop, she saw a figure standing across the street, watching from behind the hedge, tall, unmoving. Miller returned, or someone just as dangerous. Emma's relief drained away, replaced by resolve so fierce, it was almost a kind of hope. There would be no turning back, not now. She hugged Jack, holding on longer than she meant to. Whatever happens, you're not alone, she whispered. The shadows outside pressed in. The truth was out there, ugly and undeniable. But so was the courage to fight it, and in that moment, it was enough, for now. Emma's hands shook so badly, she nearly dropped the USB, its cheap plastic case digging into her palm, like a warning. She double-checked every lock, drew the curtains tight, then sat at the kitchen table with Jack hovering at her shoulder. The air in the house was brittle, charged with dread, and something colder, the sense that every wall, every window was watching. She slid the USB into her laptop. The files weren't just audio, they were video time-stamped, one after another. The first played automatically grainy footage of Miller, not as the gentle old doctor, but as a man transformed cold, calculating his eyes 2 flecks of steel. He sat at the head of a long table, a half-moon of men and women arrayed before him, many of them familiar faces from the neighborhood. Jack's stepfather was there, and the woman who ran the local bakery, and 2 teenagers Emma recognized as the ones who skulked near her mailbox at night. On screen, Miller spoke with the quiet authority of someone who expects to be obeyed. The next shipment lands Friday. Nobody gets sloppy. I want eyes everywhere, and I want silence. Someone handed him an envelope thick with cash. Another offered a list of names. The camera panned, catching faces twisted with fear or greed. Miller tapped the table. Anyone who crosses me, anyone who talks well, you've all seen what happens. Emma's blood ran cold. She clicked through more files, records of stolen electronics, ledger sheets with initials matching houses. All over Maplewood, even a folder titled Personnel. She opened it and nearly gagged. Photos of children, Jack among them, some smiling, some bruised, each file stamped with numbers, medical notes, coded language. One note read, potential for high-value transfer. Contacts in Seattle, Edmonton, and Toronto confirmed. Emma's heart pounded in her throat. This wasn't just burglary or smuggling. This was trafficking children and adults. People disappeared here. People like Jack. She scrolled faster, looking for more. There it was, footage from the night Jack ran his mother and stepfather, negotiating with Miller. Miller's voice, I see. If the boy talks, you're done. Handle it, or I will. Emma's hands clenched. She could see Jack's mother flinch, the stepfather nod grimly. Jack, standing in the corner, looked impossibly small, his face pale with terror. The camera didn't care. It kept rolling, indifferent to heartbreak. Jack's breath hitched beside her. I'm just a thing to them, he said, voice cracking. I was never their son. Just a job. Emma reached for him, her own voice trembling. You're not a thing. You're not a job. You're a person, Jack. You matter. Do you hear me? But Jack was sobbing now, hands clamped over his eyes. The truth crashed over him in waves, the betrayals, the years of pretending, the pain of never being chosen for love, only for profit. Emma gathered herself. She moved quickly, transferring the files to another encrypted USB, drafting a message with her burner email, urgent. Organized trafficking ring. Dr. Miller head. Lives endangered. Need immediate action. She sent it to her brother's private police address, to a national crime tip line, to every contact she could trust, even a reporter friend she'd barely spoken to in years. The clock ticked each second heavier than the last. She packed a go-bag for Jack and one for herself, stashing cash IDs, the burner phone protein bars, and the USB with their only hope. She mapped out 2 new escape routes, one through the neighbor's back gate, another out the front if they had to run before police arrived. She checked the window blinds for movement, her heart leaping at every passing car. Jack's sobs faded to silent tears. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. "I wanted her to love me," he whispered, staring at nothing. "Even when she hit me, even when she locked me up, I just wanted her to say sorry, to take me back." Emma sat beside him, fighting her own tears. "I know," she said, voice soft but fierce. "I know how much that hurts. But you're free now, Jack. We're getting out. And none is your fault." Jack turned to her eyes, rimmed red. "What if they find us before the police come?" "We won't let them," Emma promised, masking the terror in her own chest. "We're ready. And now so are the people who can help. You gave them the proof they need. You did that. You're braver than anyone I know." She wanted to say more to make him believe it, but the fear was thick in the room, crowding out hope. Jack hugged his knees to his chest. The truth had finally come for him, as sharp as broken glass. He was never a son, only a pawn, a commodity to be traded by those who should have protected him. Outside, the neighborhood woke as usual, dogs barking doors, slamming kids biking past. But for Emma and Jack, the world was forever changed. She kept her hand on his shoulder as she listened for sirens, praying that for once, justice would arrive in time. The clock on the wall ticked toward the hour of reckoning, and in Emma's chest, fear and fury danced, no longer paralyzed, but ready for whatever came next. Night had never felt so endless or so alive with danger. The air outside Emma's kitchen pulsed with an urgency so raw it seemed to press through the windows. Jack clung to her side, a bundle of trembling nerves, eyes darting to the shadows that stretched and crept across the walls. Every sound, each car's engine, the echo of a dog barking 2 blocks away, twisted Emma's insides tight. She checked the GPS tracker for the 10th time, making sure the SOS signal was live. Her hands shook as she pressed send, the blue dot blinking her location to the police and her brother's encrypted number. "Please see us. Please come," she prayed. But there was no time to wait. It happened faster than Emma imagined. One moment the street was as it always had been, too quiet, sleepy, normal. Then came the first unmistakable crack, the backyard gate being kicked open, the quick thud of booted feet on the porch. Lights snapped on across the street, but no one came to their aid. She saw Miller's face through the side window, calm and merciless, cell phone pressed to his ear. He spoke to someone out of view, his voice carrying in the cold air. "Go around back," he ordered. "Don't let them reach the main road." Emma's mind went white-hot with fear. "Go!" she hissed to Jack, already shoving their bags toward the back door. But Miller's men were faster than she'd guessed. They crashed through the garden, cutting off the path to the neighbor's gate. A hand reached for Jack's backpack. Emma lashed out with the heavy flashlight, landing a wild blow that bought them seconds. "Run!" she screamed, and they bolted into the darkness, vaulting the low fence and disappearing into the tangled underbrush beyond Maplewood's last row of houses. The woods swallowed them up. The ground was soft and treacherous, thick with last year's leaves and sharp sticks that clawed at their legs. Jack stumbled once, then again. "Keep going," Emma urged, half dragging him. Branches whipped across her face, cold air searing her lungs. She heard the men crashing after them, cursing and yelling. "This way, don't let them split up." The voices moving closer, closer. Flashlights arced through the trees, beams slicing through the dark so bright they burned white holes in Emma's vision. She yanked Jack to the left, heart pounding, breath ragged. Her mind replayed every movie chase scene she'd ever watched, but this wasn't a movie, this was life or death, every footstep bought by terror. The barking started, then vicious, and wild dogs, big ones, baying with the thrill of the hunt. Jack looked back, terror turning his face to stone. "They'll catch us," he whimpered. "No, they won't." Emma promised, lying through her teeth. She shoved him ahead. "You're faster. Follow the creek. Don't stop for anything." She pressed the emergency beacon on her GPS again this time, holding it up to the sky, praying the trees wouldn't block the signal. "Come on. Come on." Behind them, Miller's men fanned out, one of them yelling, "That way, I see the kid." Footsteps thundered closer. A beam of light caught Emma's arm, and she ducked behind a fallen log, pulling Jack after her. They pressed into the mud, willing themselves to disappear. Jack's breath shuddered. Emma put a hand over his mouth, her other arm wrapped protectively around his body. They lay in the dirt listening as the men crashed past Boots, pounding dogs. Snarling Miller's voice somewhere behind steady and lethal. "If you find them, bring them to me. Alive. Don't let them scream." A twig snapped inches from their hiding spot. Emma tensed, ready to run or fight anything. But luck or fate or the trees themselves seemed to hold their breath. The man moved on, cursing light, swinging away. They crawled to their feet, knees raw and bleeding. Jack's hand shook as he gripped hers, and Emma could feel his blood warm, sticky where a branch had sliced his palm open. "It's okay," she whispered, even as her own voice trembled. "We're almost out." But the woods went on forever. Every time they thought they'd lost the pursuers, a new shout or bark cracked the night open again. The cold gnawed at their bones, sap and sweat making their clothes cling uncomfortably. Still, they kept moving, stumbling over roots, scrambling up hills, doubling back to throw off the men behind them. At one point, Jack slipped in the creek muddy water, soaking his shoes, but Emma yanked him up, adrenaline drowning out exhaustion. She glanced at her phone. The signal flickered, then glowed bright blue, GPS activated. Police notified. She almost sobbed with relief. "It's working," she breathed. "They're coming." But the chase was far from over. Miller's men regrouped, flashlights now crisscrossing through the thickets, voices echoing angry and close. One dog howled a long, mournful sound that seemed to split the forest in two. Jack squeezed Emma's hand until his nails dug into her skin. "Don't leave me," he begged. "I won't. I swear it," Emma promised, pushing him ahead again. The night stretched on minute by agonizing minute, until even hope felt thin as the icy air. Blood trickled down Jack's arm, staining the cuff of his sweater. Emma's own hands were torn and raw, her legs threatening to buckle. But still, they moved, chasing the ghost of safety that always seemed just out of reach. And all the while, somewhere behind them, Miller marched relentless, his calm voice guiding the hunt. "Find them. End this." At last, just when Emma thought she'd collapse, she heard the wail of sirens far off at first, then growing louder, echoing off the hills. Flashing red and blue lights glimmered through the trees. The barking stopped. The men's voices faltered, confusion spreading like wildfire. Emma pushed Jack toward the light voice, hoarse but fierce. "Go, that's help, go." They burst from the trees, battered and shaking, into the clearing by the access road. Police cars screeched to a stop, officers pouring out with guns drawn. Behind them, Miller's men melted back into the forest, swallowed by darkness and sirens. Emma collapsed, pulling Jack into her arms, both of them sobbing, half from fear, half from relief. The world was noise and chaos and light. But for the first time in forever, they were safe. The GPS had worked. Help had come. But in the depths of the woods, evil was still on the run. And as Emma clung to Jack, she knew this was only the beginning of the reckoning that would tear Maplewood apart. Sirens and shouting still echoed in the clearing, red and blue lights bleeding through the black tangle of trees. Emma barely had time to register the heavy boots, the flood of officers breaking through the brush, before she felt Jack's grip suddenly slip from her hand. The world slowed just for a moment, her eyes struggling to keep up with the chaos unraveling all around. Miller appeared like a wraith from the tree line, his coat, ragged hair, wild eyes, feral with desperation. He moved with terrifying speed, yanking Jack backward, one arm locked across the boy's chest, the other brandishing a knife scavenged from God knows where. The night, already thick with adrenaline, snapped taut as a wire. "Back off!" Miller roared, his voice ricocheting through the trees. "Nobody moves. Nobody gets hurt. You!" He jabbed the blade at Emma, then at the nearest officer. "I want a car cache and a clear road out, or the kid gets it." Police fanned out guns, raised voices low and calculated. "Put the weapon down, Dr. Miller," the lead negotiator called, stepping forward, hands. Empty posture, calm. "You're surrounded. There's nowhere to go." Miller's face twisted, sweat shining at his temples, the knife trembling inches from Jack's throat. Jack was frozen, his small hands clamped over Miller's forearm, tears streaking the dirt on his face. The fear in his eyes was more than any child should ever have to bear. Emma's own terror sharpened to something surgical. She edged forward, keeping her hands visible, locking eyes with Jack. "Let him go, Miller," she said, her voice steady, though her knees threatened to give out. "You don't have to do this. Please, it's over. You know it's over." Miller barked a laugh, sharp and animal. "Over for who, Emma? For me. For him I built this place. This town runs because of me. You think you can just burn it all down and walk away? You built nothing but pain," Emma shot back. "You're done. Jack is not your ticket out. He's a child, not your hostage." The standoff vibrated with tension. Officers inched closer, careful not to trigger Miller's panic. The negotiator's voice was low, relentless. "Let's talk. Let's figure this out together. No one else needs to get hurt." But Miller's grip only tightened, his knuckles white. "You think I'm bluffing?" he hissed, the blade pressing into Jack's skin. Jack whimpered. Emma felt her own heart break open. She took another step, voice rising above the din. "Take me, Miller. Let Jack go. This is between you and me. I'm the one who exposed you. You want leverage. You want revenge. You know who I am. You know what I've lost. But I promise you, if you touch him, if you hurt him, I will make sure you pay for every single life you destroyed. Let him go, and you can have me instead." The forest held its breath. For a long second, Miller's eyes bored into Emma's. She saw the flicker, the crack, the falter, the small moment of confusion that always follows a lifetime of certainty. He hesitated, the knife wavering. Jack, sensing a shift, found his voice at last, a tiny hoarse whisper. "Please, let me go. I want to go home. Please, Dr. Miller, please." Emma saw the flash of something almost human cross Miller's face. A memory, maybe, or regret. Or maybe just exhaustion, so many years of hiding, running, hurting. His hand shook the blade, lowering a fraction. The negotiator stepped in, soft but urgent. "Dr. Miller, you're not alone. No one wants this to end in blood. Let Jack go. Let him go and you can walk out alive." Everything happened at once. Miller's grip loosened. Jack twisted, breaking free with a desperate wrench of his small body. Miller lunged wild, not thinking, the knife arcing. 2 shots rang out thunderous in the trees. Miller crumpled, knife clattering to the roots. Emma didn't hear her own scream. She was already running, already gathering Jack in her arms before the last echo faded. Officers rushed past, shouting commands, tackling Miller's remaining men in the brush. Jack sobbed against Emma's chest, shaking uncontrollably. "You came for me," he cried, voice muffled against her jacket. Emma held him so tightly it hurt. "I promised you. I will never leave you behind." Tears streamed down Emma's face. Relief, grief, and the first fragile stirrings of hope. Around them, the police spread out, clearing the area, cuffing the last of Miller's men. The forest was alive with the hum of radios and shouts. But for Emma and Jack, the world had shrunk to a single heartbeat, the safe, wild, thundering relief of holding on and never letting go. One medic knelt beside them, gently checking Jack's wounds. Emma let them work, never releasing his hand. She glanced up just once at Miller, bleeding and broken in the dirt, eyes locked on hers, all his power leaking away with the blood on his hands. And then it was over. The ordeal, the running, the terror, all ended with a sob in the darkness, a boy rescued, and a promise finally kept. Emma pressed her cheek to Jack's hair and breathed for the first time in so long the air of freedom. Morning broke with a strange, unfamiliar quiet. A hush, not of fear, but of something slowly mending. Sunlight streamed across the hospital room's clean white walls, splintered into golden ladders by the blinds. Emma sat beside Jack's bed, their hands linked, exhaustion in every bone but hearts impossibly light. The night had been a blur, statements, flashing cameras, the shuffle of police and social workers, faces both kind and cold, all blurring together until only Jack's voice and the steady pulse of relief remained. It was barely past dawn when the door cracked open and two elderly figures stepped hesitantly inside. Jack sat up so fast his ivy-tugged eyes impossibly wide. The old man, his hands knotted with age and worry, crossed the room in two trembling strides and swept Jack into his arms. The grandmother was not far behind her face, crumpling with tears, her voice a torrent of endearments as she smoothed Jack's hair, pressed his cheeks, checked his arms for bruises. Jack, for the first time in his memory, did not pull away. He let himself be gathered in his tears mixing with theirs, his whole body trembling in the light of family found again. The room filled with muffled sobs and promises. "We're here now, sweetheart. You're safe. No one will ever hurt you again. We should have found you sooner. We're so sorry. So sorry." Jack wept until he could weep no more, until his grandfather just held him rocking gently as if Jack were small enough to fit on a lap again. Emma turned away, blinking hard, swallowing 1,000 emotions that wouldn't fit into words. This was not her moment. It was Jack's, and she would not steal it. Later, with the morning sun climbing higher and bouquets arriving from neighbors, social workers returned with files and solemn faces. Emma found herself pulled into a side room, praised by police and pressed by reporters. But every time someone called her a hero, she shook her head, voice raw but certain. "I'm not a hero. I just listened." Jack was the one who had courage. He spoke. He ran. "I just did what anyone should do." When a detective tried to hand her a plaque, Vancouver's highest civilian commendation, Emma accepted it for Jack, her hands shaking. "He's the one who saved himself," she insisted, voice breaking. Outside the room, the neighborhood was waking up, blinking into a world remade. News trucks rolled by. The bakery across the street gave away bread for healing. The school hung a banner that read, "Welcome home, Jack." But the greatest change was quieter, deeper neighbors talking to each other, sharing stories, offering support to the families who for years had felt so alone in their private struggles. The secrets of Maplewood had been dragged into the light. The silence was broken. Healing began with simple things: borrowed sugar, shared tears, gentle promises to look out for one another. Parents hugged their children tighter. Retired men fixed the playground fence. Someone planted flowers on Miller's lawn, as if to reclaim even that cursed ground for hope. In the days that followed, Emma met with Jack's grandparents, a conference of worried, loving hearts. "We want to raise him, give him every chance we couldn't give his father," the old woman said, clutching Jack's hand. The grandfather added, voice hoarse, "But only if Jack wants that. Only if you agree." Emma looked at Jack, saw the longing and the fear, the need to belong, and the terror of losing the only safe anchor he'd known. It was the judge, a gentle woman with a faded tattoo on her wrist, who made the answer simple. "You've both protected this boy when no one else would. If you wish, Mrs. Parker, you may remain his legal guardian with the Evans family as his primary caregivers." Jack turned to Emma, silent question in his eyes. She smiled, tears prickling, and nodded. "I would be honored, Jack, if you'll have me." He nodded, too shy to speak, but his hand found hers and held tight. The court approved it. Jack's grandparents would give him the roots he'd lost. Emma would be his bridge to the world, the proof that chosen family mattered as much as blood. The first night in the Evans home was quiet, shy. Jack's room was small, but bright walls bare, save for a photo of him and Emma, arms around each other, laughing, an image neither had believed possible a month before. That evening, Jack played piano in the living room, Emma turning pages for him, his grandparents humming along. The music was not perfect, but it was alive. Each note a small rebellion against all that had been broken. Emma stayed on at Jack's request for as many nights as he needed. She made breakfast, helped with homework, answered his whispered questions about nightmares, school, and what came next. She promised every night that she was not going anywhere. As days turned to weeks, the wounds, physical and invisible, slowly closed. Jack grew steadier, laughter returning first in shy ripples, then as full rivers. His grandparents found him in the garden talking to birds. He painted, wrote poems, learned to ride a bike. Emma watched from the porch, heart full, knowing she had gained a son in all but name. Maplewood, too, began to heal. Neighbors held meetings. The mayor visited, promising reforms. A small memorial stood at the edge of the park for those lost to the darkness, silent names now remembered. Emma joined the parents' council, teaching kids how to notice the signs, how to speak, how to listen. Jack, in his quiet way, became a symbol for the possibility of new beginnings. A living proof that rescue did not end with sirens, but with the slow, ordinary work of loving. On the first day of spring, Jack helped his grandmother plant a new rosebush beside the front porch. He smiled at Emma, who knelt in the dirt beside him, and pressed a single root into the earth. "Thank you," he whispered. Emma's hand found his, and they watched as the morning sun rose over a town no longer lost in shadows. A town and a boy finally coming home. Spring in Maplewood was never just a season. It was an exhale, a chance to start over, and this year it arrived with a ferocity that felt like a blessing. The air was fragrant with rain and wild lilacs, lawns sparkled with dew, and every sunrise seemed to paint forgiveness over every surface the darkness had touched. In the Evans home, a house that now held both Jack's past and his improbable future, Emma and Jack, along with his grandparents, planted the first seeds of a life rebuilt. Emma woke early most mornings, sometimes to the sound of Jack's laughter in the kitchen, sometimes to the creak of his grandmother kneading bread. Their new rituals formed slowly: pancakes on Sundays afternoons, spent digging in the garden evenings, with stories and music by the open window. Emma guided Jack's small hands through the dirt, showing him how to press tulip bulbs into the earth, how to pat the soil just right, how to believe that something beautiful could always bloom again. The flower bed became their shared confession, each bud a reminder of wounds healed not by forgetting, but by growing past them. Jack, once so wary, so skittish and silent, bloomed even faster than the garden. He made friends at school, kids who knew only the bright-eyed boy who could run faster than anyone and draw dragons with a single line. At first he was shy, holding himself on the edge of playground games. But soon enough, laughter returned, high, unguarded, almost reckless. He built a fort with his friends behind the big maple tree. They shared comic books, secrets, plans for summer adventures. No longer did he flinch at a raised voice or search the faces of adults for danger. The monsters, real and imagined, were gone. Emma noticed the difference in quiet moments. The way Jack lingered at the dinner table, telling stories about school, the way he called for her when he had a nightmare, and more importantly, the way he sometimes didn't. Once, when he scraped his knee, he came running to her, not hiding his tears. She hugged him, bandaged him, and he let himself be comforted without shame. It was 1,000 small victories, each one earned. Emma herself grew in ways she had not thought possible. The pain of her old life softened, overtaken by a sense of purpose that went beyond her own wounds. She returned to teaching, not at first as a full-time job, but as a guest in Jack's classroom. She spoke to the children about courage, about listening, about the power of small kindnesses. A hero, she told them, is not the loudest person in the room. A hero is someone who notices when something is wrong and cares enough to do something about it, even if it's scary. The children listened wide-eyed, and afterward a few stayed behind to share their own small worries. Emma listened to them all. Word of her story and Jack's had traveled farther than she ever expected. Parents asked her for advice. The principal invited her to help develop a new program on empathy and safety. Emma accepted, not for recognition, but for Jack, for the countless children who would never have to be as brave as he was. At home, the seasons circled gently forward. The garden grew wild with color peonies, daffodils a riot of roses. Jack built birdhouses and watched robins return. He taught his grandfather how to play chess. His grandmother taught him to bake cinnamon rolls. In the evenings, they gathered around the piano, and Jack played haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, his small hands finding the notes as Emma turned pages and sang along. The neighborhood, too, had changed. Maplewood had lost its silence, but found a new kind of peace. People stopped to talk on the sidewalk. Old wounds gossiped, secrets, estrangements were slowly mended. The park, once a place Jack avoided, now echoed with the sound of children's games and parents' laughter. No one forgot the pain that had haunted the town, but they didn't let it rule them. Emma's garden became a gathering place, her front porch often crowded with neighbors, sharing lemonade advice or simply a moment in the sun. One afternoon, as sunlight drenched the kitchen and the air was sweet with baking bread, Jack stood by the open window, sketching birds in a battered notebook. Emma joined him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What are you drawing?" she asked. Jack turned, face lit with a smile as wide and easy as the sky. "A new start," he said. "For all of us." The final scene played out, not in a single moment, but in the quiet accumulation of ordinary days. Jack racing his friends through puddles, Emma planting new flowers, the family sitting together beneath a sky painted with promise. The music of their laughter spilled out over the fences, through the streets, until it seemed the whole neighborhood was humming with healing. And in the warmth of that afternoon, as Emma watched Jack run barefoot across the lawn, his voice rising in a joyful shout, she knew the truth. Darkness did not have the last word. Not here. Not anymore. In this sunlit yard under this wide open sky, hope was not a fragile thing. It was everything. And it was theirs, forever. The afternoon sunlight slid through the window of the Evans living room. Dust motes swirling in golden arcs. There was music somewhere in the background. Jack's favorite playlist, a mixture of gentle piano and bright, hopeful melodies that Emma had picked for days like this. She sat at the table, a notebook, open pen poised in one hand, but her eyes were drawn again and again to the far wall where Jack was perched atop a wooden chair working quietly. Jack's tongue peeked from the corner of his mouth as he pressed his colored pencils to the paper eyebrows, furrowed in concentration. The living room was scattered with sheets, some covered in childish doodles, others more careful and deliberate. But today's drawing was something different. This one, he'd said, was for the future. This one, he'd said, would always stay on the wall. The first lines were simple: a big house, windows thrown wide, smoke curling from a tidy chimney. In the front yard stood 4 figures holding hands. Jack had drawn himself in the middle, his smile stretching nearly ear to ear, eyes wide, with a happiness that no longer seemed borrowed or imagined. Beside him, one arm slung over his shoulders, stood Emma, her hair a mess of wavy gray and brown lines, her eyes bright, her mouth forever caught mid-laugh. On the other side, Jack's grandparents, standing a little taller than real-life arms, outstretched faces, soft and proud. Above them all, a sun so large and yellow, it seemed to pour off the page, filling the space with light. And behind the figures, their garden thick with color, each flower carefully etched in a small monument to resilience. Jack pinned the drawing to the wall with 2 magnets, a ladybug, and a red heart. He stepped back, surveying his work with a gravity that made Emma smile. He called her over. "Do you like it?" he asked, voice half shy, half brimming with hope. Emma crouched beside him, studying the drawing as if it was the most important artifact she'd ever seen. "I love it, Jack," she whispered, her voice catching. "I absolutely love it." He leaned against her, warmth radiating from his small body. For a moment, neither said anything. They just stared at the future, a vision not of what had been lost, but what had finally impossibly been found. Later that evening, after dinner and stories and the quiet hush of bedtime, Emma sat by her window, journal open once more. Her thoughts moved slowly at first, as if searching for a way to capture everything that had passed. The storms, the terror, the almost miracles. But as she wrote, the words began to flow steady and sure. July 21st. The garden is blooming. Jack laughs every morning. He draws the world as he wants it to be, full of light, full of family. Sometimes I wake up and the ache is still there, but it doesn't hurt the same. It reminds me that survival is only the beginning. Healing is the rest. She paused, thinking of all the times she'd wondered what difference a single voice could make. She thought of the night Jack ran through the rain, desperate and brave. She thought of the way silence nearly swallowed them both, and the courage it took for a child to whisper help and for a stranger to listen. She wrote, "You don't have to save the world. Sometimes you just have to listen. That's where hope begins. That's how you save a soul. The page was nearly full when Jack's footsteps padded into the room. His hair mussed, sleep heavy in his eyes. He climbed into Emma's lap, curling up as if he was still a much smaller boy. She held him, her arms circling him, and together they watched the street below, quiet now, save full of gentle, everyday magic. Outside, the town carried on. Maplewood was not perfect. Wounds did not heal in a day, but the darkness had been broken. Neighbors waved from porches, children drew chalk rainbows on the sidewalk, and laughter rolled across the lawns like a promise. As night fell, Jack placed his drawing on the refrigerator for everyone to see. Beneath it, Emma added her own small note, family, chosen and found. She turned off the lights, leaving the picture aglow in the golden hush. On the screen, as the film's final images unfurl, Jack's drawing Emma's journal. The kitchen filled with soft laughter, a single line fades into view. Stark and unwavering. Don't ever ignore a cry for help. You might be someone's miracle. The music swells, not loud or triumphant, but gentle, like a sunrise after endless rain. The credits roll over images of Jack and Emma gardening, laughing, living the life they fought so hard to claim. The light in the house spills into the night, carrying with it the message that, in a broken world, hope is a choice, one you make again and again, with every act of kindness, every small bravery, every moment you decide to listen. And in that warmth, the story ends not with grand applause, but with the quiet, contagious certainty that healing is real, love is possible, and that somewhere someone is always waiting for a voice that cares enough to answer.